we were taught that love is a reward, right? And that belonging had to be earned. And that a man's value is proven by how much he can carry or control or conquer. And so we perform. We perform strength, we perform confidence, we perform happiness. And then somewhere along the way, we started calling all of this performance manhood. But the truth is, it's just exhaustion in disguise, I think. See, we're not thriving. It feels like we're auditioning. And every relationship, every workplace, every friendship just becomes another stage, another test of our worth that we didn't even agree to take in the first place. Here at Bintegers, we believe that peace isn't found in perfection, it's found in presence. And integrity is what helps keep us grounded when performance would rather keep us pretending. And intimacy, it's not a prize that we have to earn. It's a space that we create when we finally stop competing long enough to be real. See, we live in a culture where performance has replaced connection and where men are trained to prove and not to be. And everything around us whispers the same message, and that is be exceptional, be efficient, be admired, and then when you can't, just pretend. And we're praised for the outcomes, but not necessarily for the honesty. We're rewarded for control, but not for compassion. And the result is we have a generation of men now who look powerful, but feel hollow. And we know how to impress, but we don't know how to rest. And that's the trap. See, performance gives you validation, but it never gives you a sense of belonging. And you can get applause without intimacy, yes. And you can win in life without being known. And you can lead without ever feeling loved. But deep down, though, every man knows that applause fades really fast. And the silence that follows, that's where the truth lives. So we don't fear failure as much as we fear being seen without our armor on. Because connection requires exposure. And exposure feels super dangerous to men who never feel safe being themselves. And if we're honest, most of us, we've learned very early that performance gets results. Performing makes people proud. Performing is what made us popular in the first place. Performing is what made us feel worthy. But the moment that we build our worth on approval, our peace now becomes negotiable. And so we start living for reactions instead of for reflection. And then before we know it, our entire life is scripted and it's rehearsed and it's curated through success and measured through our emotional expressions. And we don't even call this acting anymore because we call it ambition. See, I think I've seen this everywhere in these corporate offices around us, in church pulpits and locker rooms, and even in therapy circles. Men who are desperate to connect, but are terrified of dropping the persona that earned them respect. And so we envy freedom, but we worship performance. And every time someone tells us to man up, what they're really saying is, hide better. And that's why we compete so hard, because competition distracts us from the pain of loneliness. It gives us something, if you will, to chase instead of something to feel. But connection asks us to slow down, right? Connection asks us to stop performing just long enough to let someone see behind the mask that we're wearing. And that's what feels impossible when your entire identity has been kept on keeping it together. Because here's what no one tells you. The performance trap doesn't keep you admired. It just keeps you isolated. And you can't be fully loved while you're only half present. You can't build a brotherhood, a community, while you're performing superiority. And that's why so many of us feel unseen, even when everyone is watching us. There's this quiet moment, I think, that hits every man eventually, and that is when the performance stops working, when the recognition doesn't quite land, right? When the achievements don't really fill the space that they used to once. And suddenly, the silence that you've been outrunning catches up to you. See, that's the moment of truth. That's the moment when performance collapses under its own weight. Because the soul can't sustain pretending forever, right? And what's left beneath that image is often a question that most men, they don't really know how to answer. And that is, who am I without trying to prove myself? We've been trained, I think, to believe that connection makes us weak. And that vulnerability is really unmanly. And that needing others means losing our independence. But that's the lie that keeps us lonely, because real strength isn't just independence, it's interdependence. It's knowing how to stand without isolating, and how to share without having to shrink. And you don't lose power when you connect, you actually multiply it. You stop performing for validation, and now you start instead showing up from congruence. And that's not weakness, that's wholeness. See, the performance trap, it doesn't always look like hustle culture. Sometimes it looks like humor. Sometimes it looks like being the chill guy who never really complains. Sometimes sometimes it just looks like we're being the reliable one, right? The one who always shows up but never really opens up. Every mask has a purpose, right? And that is survival. But what protected you once can be the very thing that's imprisoning you now, though. Because eventually every act gets heavy, every persona gets tired, and the only thing that's strong enough to hold you is the truth that you've been avoiding this whole time. And I think it's time for us to start redefining what strength is. Not as control, but as congruence. Not as dominance, but as depth. Not as what we are projecting, more like than what we're practicing. Strength isn't in being untouchable, it's in being unpretentious. It's in being able to look someone in the eye and say, I don't have it all together, but I'm here and I'm being honest right now. That's leadership. That's maturity right there. That's manhood at peace. And if you've been caught in that performance cycle where you're always trying to be the best, where you're trying to prove your worth, where you're trying to stay on even when you're empty, it's time to exhale, because what you're craving isn't more recognition, it's just rest. And rest doesn't come from doing less, it comes from being more of yourself. You don't have to retire your ambition. You just have to retire your armor that you've been wearing. Ambition that's built from insecurity, it always burns out. But ambition that's built from alignment, that's legacy. And if this is landing deep for you, that endless drive to prove, the quiet panic when things slow down, the exhaustion, if you will, of always needing to be okay, I get this. That's why I built In the Ashes of the Alpha Male. It's a course where we stop pretending that performing is our purpose. So this foundational course, it's really what helps you name the mask that you've been wearing, and to trace the wound, and to start breathing again. So this is for those who are ready to go even further, where we want to rebuild the masculine identity from presence and from peace and from integrity. And you can find it now at uberbintegers.com. So it's not about losing your drive, but more so finding your direction. And in tomorrow's episode, we're going to take this conversation even a little deeper, because behind every man that's addicted to performance is a root wound that's shaped him long before he ever became an adult. And that's the root wound, why we'd rather be respected than loved. So we'll trace where the proving began and why love still feels unsafe, and why we still crave it the most. Because at some point, I think every one of us men realize that connection is the only competition that matters. And the prize isn't really approval, it's alignment. So when you start valuing your peace over your performance, you'll see your relationships starting to shift, where your friendships begin to deepen, and where your leadership evolves even further, and where you stop measuring your masculinity by how many people fear you and start measuring it instead by how many people feel safe when they're around you. And that's how real men rise. I think we've been sold a lie that connection will cost us credibility. But the truth is that performance costs us our peace. And peace is really the foundation of everything that matters. So maybe the goal isn't to prove that you can carry more, but it's to remember that you were never meant to carry your load alone, right? And that's where performance ends. And that's where presence can now begin, right? Let me know in the comments how this episode landed for you, and I will see you in tomorrow's episode. Bye for now.